Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game.
You're listening to PTCG Radio.
Now this week there is once again a lot going on in the game, so I'm going to roll pretty much straight into this. I am going to talk quite a bit about the new season and about the battle roads that have started and that I did attend this past week. However, there has been some very, very big news which once again leaked on the morning I do the podcast, just to make things easier. And this is the new Japanese set, Black and White 7 Plasma Gale, which is coming out on Friday in Japan. And I've been telling you about some of these cards over the past couple of weeks. Things like Plasma Frigate and Plasma Energy and Lugia EX. Well, the whole set has leaked and we can now see exactly what's going on with these Plasma trainers. And to be blunt, I'm a little bit concerned. Although there are some very, very exciting cards and some good opportunities coming through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this new section by looking at Plasma Gale. I'm not going to go through the entire set in a huge amount of detail like I did in the past, purely because I want to focus a lot on the new set and about battle roads which we're all attending at the moment. But some of this stuff does deserve to be looked at. So first things first, we need to look at the engine with which we're being provided. First off, we've got Plasma Energy. I've spoken about this before. It is a colourless energy, and it does nothing else. It's a colourless energy. Plasma Frigate is a stadium, which says that if you've got Plasma Energy attached to your Pokemon, they then have no weakness. Now that's not just for Plasma Pokemon, remember, that is for any Pokemon. But it is incredibly powerful. So although Plasma Energy doesn't do anything, with Plasma Frigate, it's starting to look quite good. And there's another card which works with Plasma Energy, and that is Colress Machine. And this is a trainer card that allows you to attach a Plasma Energy from your deck, but only to a Team Plasma Pokemon. You draw that trainer, and you get a second energy attachment for the turn. A new card, which has been revealed this morning, is Plasma Grunt. Now this is a supporter, which does seem to be exclusive to Plasma, because in order to use it, you have to discard a Team Plasma card. And presumably that could be another Team Plasma Grunt, being a supporter, or a trainer, or a Pokemon, as long as it's a Team Plasma card. And when you discard that Team Plasma card, you get to draw 4 cards. So it's like a souped up Cheran. But we saw how Bill drawing 2 cards saw no play. Cheran drawing 3 cards has seen a little bit of play, especially with the, quite frankly, terrible supporters we've got at the moment. I think drawing 4 cards might be the threshold that we start to enjoy this card. There are no downsides other than discarding the card. You don't have to get rid of your hand, and it's not like Bianca where you have to put up with 2 cards occasionally or 1 card. So there are definitely some bonuses there. And the final card that makes up this engine is Plasma Ball. And this is a trainer card that allows you to search for any Plasma Pokemon. Presumably this also includes the EXs of Lugia and Articuno. So what you've got there is a special energy which can be attached from the deck, a stadium that removes weakness, a fairly good supporter, and the only good Pokemon search card we've got. At the moment, we've got Pokemon Communication, which relies on you having another Pokemon in hand. Ultra Ball, that relies on you discarding 2 cards from your hand. Heavy Ball, which will get some Pokemon. And Level Ball, that will get some Pokemon. And I suppose you could also count Great Ball and Pokeball, but they're pretty terrible. Team Plasma Pokemon have now got Plasma Ball, which is a very, very good Pokemon search. So all of a sudden, it's looking like these Team Plasma cards are getting a nice advantage. It's not quite the level of SP, but it's certainly a lot of advantages that most decks would kill for. So let's have a look at the Pokemon that they can use here. And there are 4 basic Pokemon which are particularly good here. One of them I've mentioned before is Lugia. This is a Pokemon that for 4 colourless energy does 120 damage, but in order to do that damage you've got to discard a Plasma Energy, so you've got to have one attached. The upside is, it's got an ability which is just like RDL's old body, Rayquaza Deoxys Legend's old body. And that says that when you take a KO, you take an extra prize. There's Rotom, which is another card I've mentioned before. For just a lightning and a colourless, you get to look at your opponent's hand, and that in itself is quite an advantage. And you get to do 20 damage times the number of trainers in their hand. They've got 5 trainers, you do 100 damage. bearing in mind that colourless energy could be plasma, which is attached from the deck. So that is a very reasonable turn 1 attack, by which I mean you can do it turn 1. I would argue against it being reasonable. There is another Plasma EX, and that is Articuno EX. For a water energy and 2 colourless, it does 60 damage plus 10 to your opponent's bench. That's alright, not great. For 2 water energy and 2 colourless, it does 80 damage, which is poor. However, there is another thing going on here. If your Articuno has a plasma energy attached to it, you get automatic paralysis. Now, we've all seen how good automatic paralysis can be. We've seen it with Vanillux and Excelgor last season. This is a basic Pokemon that does consistent automatic paralysis, and you don't have to shuffle it back in your deck and then find it again, and you don't do it on a coin flip. It's automatic paralysis, and you've just got to have an energy attached to it. And bearing in mind we're talking about a format here without Junk Arm where people are only playing 4 switch maximum, but a lot of decks that play Darkrai have actually gone to 0 switch. That is potentially insanely good. The only upside for the rest of us that aren't playing this card is that it does take at least 3 energy attachments. But that's still a very, very good card. This does also mean that a lot of people are going to be forced to play Enhanced Hammer or Garchomp or something that can get rid of special energy. We're going to see Cobalion EX in a minute that can get rid of special energy. Because if you let an Articuno sit there with a plasma energy and you can't get rid of it, it's going to be auto-paralysing every single turn. Now there's one other Pokemon which makes me incredibly happy, and that is Snorlax. I like Snorlax. He's always been one of my very favourite Pokemon, and he's being reprinted. And it is potentially playable. It's got an attack which does 30... It's only got one attack, but the attack does 30 damage for each Plasma Pokemon you've got out on your field. So if you've got a full bench and a Snorlax active, that's 180 damage. And for those of you paying attention, without an Eviolite or a Giant Cloak, that is enough to KO any EX Pokemon with a non-EX Pokemon. The downside, that attack costs 5 colourless energy. Even if you start going double colourless and plasma energy, you're still talking about being lucky to get it up in 2 turns. Having said that, it is an insanely powerful attack. It's like a supercharged round attack. So in that respect, I think we can probably be a little bit happy that it costs that much to use the attack. It's also got quite a funky ability which stops your opponent retreating, which means that unless they've got a switch, and I have just mentioned that people are playing less switch nowadays, it means that you're going to be able to capture a Pokemon and keep it active while you try and get that energy onto Snorlax. So if you can't get him going quick enough, but your opponent is silly enough to bench a Pokemon without the energy to attack, or that they don't want to attack with, and they haven't got a switch, you can hold it there while you attach the energy to Snorlax. So they're the Team Plasma Pokemon. The other one I should mention, which isn't a basic, is one I've mentioned before, and that is Klinklang, which gives you immunity. It gives all of your metal Pokemon immunity from Pokemon EXs, and that can obviously be used in an old school Klinklang deck. I say old school, it was only around at Worlds and Nationals, but it can be used in that Klinklang deck. There's also Crobat, which I'll be mentioning very briefly. So that's the Plasma Gale stuff, the Team Plasma Gale stuff, and it's looking like we're heading to a situation where there is going to be a lot of Team Plasma decks. Certainly I'm looking at those cards thinking, oh, I can make a really good deck out of this, that and the other. I think you can make a deck with Articuno, Rotom and Snorlax, and it could potentially be an absolutely fabulous deck. And with Lugia running off colourless energy, you could stick him in as well. But I do think it's going to be very, very popular. There are other EXs though. There are 2 EXs in the set that aren't Team Plasma. One of them is Cobalion, and this guy has potential. For a single metal energy, he does 30 damage and allows you to discard a special energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Now this is very good for things like Articuno EX or Lugia EX that are going to have plasma energy attached to it, or even for other decks that are relying on double colourless, etc. And you can do that turn 1 for a single energy, so that's pretty nice. The second attack for a metal, and a colourless does 100 damage, which isn't bad. and it's not affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon. Things like EV Light, it goes right through. It even goes through resistance. The downside is it doesn't work with weakness either, so it won't one-hit KO an Articuno X or a Kyurem X, which is a slight downside to the card, shall we say. So Empoleon, quite good, some potential. We're going to have to see. The other EX initially looks pretty bad. It's Victini EX, and we know all the kids like Victini, and we know that Victini is a popular Pokemon, but actually its attacks are fairly underwhelming. The first attack for a Fire Energy allows you to search your deck for 2 basic energy and attach it to bench Pokemon, and that's fine, it's decent enough, but it's got, I think, 110 HP. You do not want a weak attack on a Pokemon that's got 110 HP. That's, quite frankly, asking for trouble. The second attack, for a Fire and 2 Colourless, does 50 damage, and kind of like Bouffalon, you double that damage if it is a Pokemon EX. So you're doing 100 to Pokemon EX, which is, again, fine, but the problem there is that 100 damage doesn't really do much to a lot of Pokemon EX. It will KO Registeel EX and Empoleon EX, but that's your lot. However, one of the Ace-Spec trainer cards is called Victory Piece. And what Victory Piece does is a trainer item tool, in the same way the first Ace-Spec trainer cards we're going to see, attached to Black and White Kyurem. This attacks to Victini EX, and it allows you to attack for free. Which means that if you get Victini EX out on turn 1, and you can get a Victory Piece attached to it on turn 1, you are doing 100 on turn 1 without using any energy. Now, a lot of decks are not going to take down your Victini before you've taken 2 prizes. So even if you start with it, if you can get that Victory Piece, huge, huge advantage. Victini is not even a Pokemon that you need to put into a dedicated deck. You can just stick one of them in with a Victory Piece and 4 Skylar and get it working. Now that is the other thing I need to mention. Ace-Spec cards, you can only play one of them. So if you play Victory Piece, not only can you only play one Victory Piece, but you can't play on any other Ace-Spec cards. However, we have got Skylar, which allows you to search for any trainer item, which means you can play 4 Skylar, which essentially means you've got 5 cards that will get you that Victory Piece turn 1. And then, of course, you can play 4 Random Receiver, which will not guarantee you a Skylar, but in an average supporter line as they are now, you would have about a 40% chance of hitting a Skylar, assuming you play 4 Skylar and about 12 supporters overall. So what that means is that you've actually got 6 or 7 cards, effectively. And then your odds of hitting that turn 1 Victory Piece look a lot better. A lot of the time you aren't even going to have to switch this Victini out. He hasn't got free retreat, he's got a 1 retreat. But you can afford to attach an energy and burn that... you can afford to attach an energy to another Pokemon and burn that to retreat for Victini, because you don't need to attach energy to attack with Victini. This is potentially a donking machine. And bearing in mind we've got Pokemon like Rotom that can donk, and Lugia who can be hitting insane damage early game, I'm not liking these hard-hitting basics that go off turn 1. Now there are some Stage 2 Pokemon in this set which do give a little bit of hope to having a non-basic dominated format. The first one of these, and potentially my favourite card in the set, is Magnezone, which has a wonderful ability allowing you to play 2 supporters per turn. Now, it looks like that isn't stackable because of the wording of it, but until we get an English translation, we can't know for sure. So what that means is you put Magnezone on your bench, boom, 2 supporters per turn. You can have a Colress and shuffle your deck and draw up to 10, and then play a Skylar or a Cherin. It's also got a half-decent attack for 2 Lightning and a Colourless. It does 80, and then it's effectively Warp Point. You put Magnezone to the bench, they switch their Pokemon. This could be run with something like Gothitelle to recreate the old Curse-Scar, whilst adding a lot of consistency. And let's face it, a lot of people are going to be playing things like Lugia that are lightning weak. So potentially there's a deck there, although it does rely on 2 Stage 2s. There's Crobat, which I've mentioned before. For a double colourless and a psychic energy, it does 40 plus poison, but that poison does 40 in between turns, and there's a stadium which increases that still further. And Crobat's got an ability to let you draw a second card per turn, which does stack. For Crobat, you're drawing 5 cards per turn. So these, in theory, are stage 2s that when you get them out, add a bit of consistency to your deck. Now there is a very interesting other Pokemon in Plasma Gale, Clefable. And what Clefable does, it allows you to search for an evolution Pokemon and play it immediately onto a Pokemon on your bench. So for instance, if you had a Fampi out, you could search for a Donphan and evolve it. The very interesting thing about this card is, it allows you to evolve Pokemon the turn you play them down. So you can play Tynamo and then use a Clefable to search an Electric and immediately evolve it, adding quite some speed. If you get 2 Clefable out, you can stick a Magnemite down and then search out a Magneton and evolve it, and then search out a Magnezone and evolve it. I believe this stacks, although again, we're going to have to wait for the English wording. So they are potentially very, very good. And just another little quick mention for Klinklang, that metal Pokemon that makes you immune to EXs, or makes all your metal Pokemon immune to EXs. That's going to work in a nice deck with Registeel EX and Gabalion EX, trying to screw over all those decks relying on these new fantastic EX Pokemon. The big problem with anyone trying to make that deck is, you can come across a Victini that one-hits anything you get out for no energy. And I know that when you get Klinklang out, that's going to shut off Victini. The problem is, Victini can be going turn 1. You cannot possibly get your Klinklang out till turn 2. Until you get your Klinklang out, Victini is going to have an absolute field day. And this can be teched into any deck. So they are the Pokemon there. There's a couple other things worth mentioning. Firstly, the new Ace-Spec trainers, and I am getting excited by Ace-Spec trainers now because they're getting good. The first 2 we saw were Pants, and then they revealed Computer Search. And Computer Search is one that everyone was like, everyone's going to play that. There was a potion that does 90, and there were the 2 for Black and White Kyurem, but they were all pretty underwhelming. But now we have 3 new ones. We've got Victory Piece, which I already mentioned, but we've got 2 which can fit in any deck. We've got Scramble Switch, which at the moment looks like the one I'm most excited about playing with. Scramble Switch is Switch. It allows you to switch your active Pokemon with a bench Pokemon. But it also allows you to move all the energy. So you can have something like an Articuno active, Snorlax on the bench. You play Scramble Switch, move all those 4 energy over to Snorlax, add a 5th so your Snorlax is going, and then you can Max Potion the Pokemon from which you've taken all the energy off. It's very exciting. And the last Ace-Spec trainer is Dowsing Machine. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Junkarm. Junkarm is already seeing a reprint. But it's an Ace-Spec trainer card. There's 1 in your deck. So I don't think it's that bad. The secret rares are pretty good in this set. There's a full art Skylar, which I'm excited about. There is a secret rare Charizard, which hasn't been printed in English yet. A secret rare Blastoise, which hasn't been printed in English yet. And a secret rare random receiver, which means you might end up playing against people who have got full art Biancas and Cherins and Ends and secret rare random receivers and catchers, which means you can now start making more expensive decks than we've pretty much ever had, which is quite funky. So to sum up Plasma Gale, because this is starting to go on a little bit, we are getting some really good Stage 2 Pokemon and Clefable, which are allowing a lot of consistency, and this is absolutely fantastic. The problem is we are also getting a lot of very powerful basics and a lot of specific types of Pokemon, Plasma I'm thinking here, which are getting advantages the others don't get. So potentially good, but I think there is a little bit of a worry here. So taking it back to the new season now, I went to my first 2 Battle Roads this weekend, and I would like to tell you about them. The deck I chose to play for both these Battle Roads was a fairly unusual deck. It was Empoleon, which in itself isn't that unusual, and it was played with Terrakion, which in itself isn't that unusual. But I played it with Roserade. Now this idea was given to me by Tommy Roberts, who actually piloted Empoleon to a top 8 finish at UK Nationals and should have played it for Worlds, but didn't. What can we say? If you're listening, Tommy, you're done bad. And he mooted this idea to me of an Empoleon deck with just 4N and no other supporters running off Roserade. He then made this deck and didn't like it, but I made what I consider to be a better version of this deck, and I did like it. I played 6 supporters with no random receiver. I played 4N and 2 Cherin, and that was it. I did, however, play 4 Level Ball, 4 Pokemon Communication, 4 Rare Candy, 3 Emolga to search out basics, and a Mew EX, which could work as Emolga if I started with it, and a free 2 line of Roserade. That meant as long as I could get some basics out turn 1, and with Emolga and all my 8 Pokemon search, that was fairly likely. In order to get a turn 2 Empoleon, I didn't need a Rare Candy Empoleon. I needed one of them, and a Roserade, or a Pokemon Communication, or a Level Ball. And this led to a deck which gives me a turn to Empoleon 80% of the time on average. It is wonderful. And as soon as you get the Empoleon out, you've then got the built-in draw power, you've got a second Roserade for when you need it, and eventually those supporters are going to come along, but it doesn't usually matter if they don't. I played Energy Switch instead of Experience Share to get my Terrakions up and running in one turn, because I didn't want anything to be ruined by Tool Scrapper. I didn't run any Blend Energy because I didn't want my day ruined by Enhanced Hammer. And I played 3 Max Potions because Empoleon's hard to one-hit KO and it attacks for 1 energy. I enjoyed it when they hit me for 100, 120, and then I could just discard it. Discard the damage, I mean. It's odd phrasing, but it works. Now there are problems with this deck. Firstly, if they can one-hit KO your Empoleon, that is bad news bears. If they can one-hit KO your Empoleons regularly, you've pretty much lost the game. Eels is also a very tough matchup, and although it's not seeing a great amount of play all around the world, it is seeing a great amount of play in the UK. And as you're going to see from my reports, it was played so much that maybe Empoleon was a bad call. It also very, very rarely drew dead, but when it did, you were completely screwed because you had a lot of weak basics that your opponent could take out very, very easily. And the low damage output was sometimes a problem. Your opponent could manipulate their bench, and if you couldn't fill your bench, sometimes it was hard to get enough damage on the field. And then there's also that problem, like I hinted at a minute ago, you're playing a lot of weak basic Pokemon. Some games, your opponent can literally use all 4 of their catchers as 4 prizes. It's not the end of the world, because then you can force them to try and KO Terrakions and Empoleons and max potion the damage, but it's still awkward. So the first tournament I went to was this past Saturday down in Sutton Coldfield, just outside Birmingham. One of the best places to play in the whole of the UK, and I mean that very sincerely. Run by absolutely fabulous, wonderful people, and it always gets a turnout of really, really good players. We had multiple Worlds players from last year, people like Jack Stewart Armstead, Tommy Roberts, Tamal Cameron, and along with a lot of other good people like Charles Barton and Johnny Hall, who just missed out on Worlds. There was around 20 Masters, and this led to a 5-round Swiss 30-minute single game with a top 4. Now I know in the US you don't have top cut anymore, but we still do in the UK. Round 1, I played against Jonathan Cowley in his very first ever competitive Masters match, playing Zekils. Now luckily he got started very slowly this game. I got Stunfisk out and hit his Zekrom for 40, then I hit it for 80. He couldn't then Bolt Strike without KOing himself, but he managed to top a Max Potion and buy himself a turn and start getting set up. And unfortunately, by the time I'd taken my first prize, he was then set up. I managed to attack mostly with Terrakion using Empoleon as draw. I took out most of his heals with Catcher, and eventually, when it was coming down to the wire and he was getting a lot of prizes very quickly, he had benched a Raikou, and I was able to take that out with a Terrakion to take the game. It ended up being incredibly close, but I'd won my first game and I was feeling pretty good. Round 2, I played against Mike Lamb with Rayquaza Eels, a second Eels deck. Luckily in this game I start like an absolute rocket and I take all his Eels out with Catcher before he can get going. He actually didn't play Max Potion in this build, so I was able to quite easily 2-hit KO his Rayquaza, and then he had a Raikou on the bench which I took out with Terrakion to win the game after he'd taken 1 prize, which was quite good, but he did draw fairly badly that game. Round 3, I played against Jack Stewart Armstead, he who got top 32 at Worlds this year, with Darkrai Hydreigon. And I was happy to not be playing an Eels deck. And I started this game, and at the end of my first turn, I had 2 Piplups and 2 Emolgas down, and I was feeling pretty good. And my hand was literally perfect. I had a Rare Candy Empoleon, I had a Water Energy, I had a Catcher, and I had a Roserade which I could use to grab a Cherin or an N to get myself a nice new hand. And then he ends me. And I just draw completely dead, and he runs through all my basics. Had he not ended me, I would have got completely set up turn 2, and I could have started taking out his dinos and getting Terrakions to set up KOs on his Darkrai's, etc, etc. It doesn't matter. He ended me, he did the right thing by ending me. He tells me later that he pokered me, in a way. He looked for a tell to see if I had a good or bad hand, and he thought I had a good hand. He was right. After round 3, we had a raffle. Now, Sutton Coldfield surprises me. It turns a profit. They make money from these tournaments. They charge £4 for entry, and they had a raffle. And what happens is they give everyone a ticket and everybody gets a prize. Some people get booster packs, some people get plushies, my girlfriend got a sticker and colouring book, which I kind of wish I'd got one myself because I got a pack of Noble Victories and pulled nothing. But it's just wonderful that they do these things that they don't have to do and that other places don't do. They are just wonderful, lovely people. And anyone in the UK that can get down to Sutton Coldfield, please do. Round 4, I'm drawn against Ryan Middleton, the brother of Pokemon Dan, and he's playing Zekiels. Luckily, I start with an Emolga and he starts Lone Tynamo and I win the flip. So on my turn, I use Pokemon Communication to get out my Stunfisk, the new Dragon's Exalted Stunfisk. I don't have a fighting energy, so I play as much from my hand as I can to raise my chances of drawing a fighting energy. I then play an N and I draw the fighting energy for a donk. We played a fun game afterwards, and due to an energy drought in the mid-game, Ryan took a very narrow victory. So I'm then left with round 5. I'm 3-1, my resistance is fantastic, and I know that a win here gets me into top cut. He goes first with Terrakion. He's playing Mewtwo Terrakion, sorry. He goes first with Terrakion EX, attaches. I get an Emolga, and I start getting set up. Now on his second turn, he catches Roselia, and I don't think this is a problem. On my turn, I get an Empoleon, I get an energy. And all I need to get that Roselia out of the active is an energy switch, or a switch, or a level ball, or a Pokemon Communication, or a Roserade. And even you being able to use Diving Draw, I whiff the lot, I can't get it out the active, and I lose a turn of attacking. He starts taking a prize lead, but I come back. I free hit KO a Terrakion EX after he hits 3 potions in one turn. But mid-game, even though I've got 2 Empoleons out and I'm drawing 5 cards per turn, I go 2 turns without drawing an energy. I got below 15 cards in my deck having only seen 2 energy. The one I put on the Emolga and the one I put on that first Empoleon. And that basically led to 3 missed turns of attacking, and there was absolutely no way back from that. He swept with Mewtwo and he took a deserved victory. This left me 3-2 with an insane 68% opponent's win percentage as the highest ranked 3-2, but it was 6th and it didn't get me any points. I felt like my deck played well, both the losses were pretty much out of my control, but what can you do, these things happen. I was disappointed, so the next day I decided to drive down to rural Wales to Aberdare, a place where I'd wanted to go for a while but never actually upped and gone. So me and my girlfriend got in the car, we drove down, and just before registration closed we got as high as 8 Masters. Now this is significant because any less than 8 Masters, only first and second get points. So 8 Masters, top 4 get points. I'm feeling pretty confident about getting points here. So round 1, I draw against Calvin. He's a lovely Welsh guy, a very, very good player, topped to Nationals a couple of years ago. He's playing Garchomp Altaria. First game is fairly straightforward. I go off like an absolute rocket. Although he wins the flip, on turn 2 I've got double Empoleon, double Roserade. And I just start sweeping and I win the prize race quite quickly. I also play Max Potion and he doesn't, so when he hits me with Garchomp, I can heal the energy off. Game 2 was a different story. He set up very fast, and he was always slightly ahead in the prize race. And he captured 4 weak bench Pokemon and killed them. And then I realised that he'd played all 4 of his catches. So we were running out of time here and I was behind in the game and I was considering whether I should scoop to guarantee going first in game 3. But I figured a better tactic would be prize denial. So I used Max Potion, I used Switch, I used good old fashioned losing energy to retreat. And I stopped him taking any KOs while I came back to win the game, knowing that he had no catches. Now round 2 I played Mike Lamb, the guy from yesterday, playing Rails, making this the 3rd Eels game out of 7, which is the 4th Eels game out of 7. But what can you do? Eels is everywhere. Now, he'd made some changes to his deck since yesterday. He'd put Mewtwo in, and he'd put Max Potion in. And I'd taken my Mew out for this tournament, which meant that I couldn't get the easy KO on his Mewtwo. But really, this game came down to a ruling, which is just the worst way to lose. What happened was, fairly early in Game 1, I've got 2 Empoleon out. One of them's active and hitting. I've put some damage on his Rayquaza, and he needs a third electric energy. He's got 2 electric energy and a prism attached. He needs a third electric energy to take me out. And he can't draw it, but he draws a prism. He attaches a second prism and discards 2 lightning and a prism to do 180 and KO my Empoleon. At which point I call a judge. And I tell the judge that I don't think this is possible because he has to discard either basic lightning or basic fire. The judge tells me that's not the case and that my opponent can discard the prism energy to do an extra 60 damage. So I appeal to the head judge, and the head judge comes over and tells me that no, this can happen, and he is allowed to do 180 damage. Now, the only other judge there is a very prolific, very respectable judge who judged at Worlds this year. Someone who knew the correct ruling. Unfortunately, she's my girlfriend, and I cannot call over my girlfriend to overrule the other 2 judges at the tournament. So knowing the ruling's wrong, I accept it. And I win the second game, lose the first, and I lose in sudden death. Now, had I not taken Mew out of my deck, I would have had a much better chance here. But unfortunately, in every game, he was able to discard Prism Energy to do that extra 60 and one-hit KO Empoleons. And as I mentioned earlier, this ability to one-hit KO Empoleons really makes this matchup so much harder for me. And I'm not saying it definitely lost me the game. That would do a disservice to my opponent, who played very well. But I am saying that it made a huge, huge difference. What also made a difference was that all 3 games he started one of his 2 Rayquaza EX, and he had at least 2 Eels out turn 2 every game. But that's just because he had a good list and he's a very, very good player. So at this point, instead of going into the 3rd round playing for 1st or 2nd, I'm now playing for 3rd or 4th. I'm drawn against a lovely guy called John, who's there with his grandson, and he's been playing the game for 6 weeks. There's not really anything to say about the game. He's a new player that's been playing for 6 weeks. He was playing Zekiels with Kyurem EX, but he was a lovely chap, and we had a really, really nice game. At which point, we finished that game fairly quickly, and I went and watched Calvin's last game. He was the guy I played round 1. He was playing against another Rayquaza Eels. And it literally came down to, if Calvin wins the game, I get 3rd. If he doesn't, I get 4th. Luckily, Calvin wins, I get 3rd, and I get a nice victory cup. I'm not going to lie, though. Even though it would have been 5 points at the most, probably 2 points, and as I mentioned last week, those 2 points are basically irrelevant. It's very disappointing to lose in such circumstances on an incorrect ruling. Now, I don't blame the judges, because the judges explained to me where they'd got the ruling from, and they had been misinformed. It wasn't their fault. I also don't blame my opponent, who made an honest mistake and went along with the ruling by the judges. But it was disappointing, to say the least. Now, in terms of those tournaments, Pokemon Dan, the man who graciously hosts my podcast, you may even be listening to it on his YouTube channel right at this very minute. I'm looking at you, Steve. He won that tournament in Sutton Coldfield. He played Darkrai Hydreigon with a Giratina EX tech, which I lent him. And he did very well, beating Tamal Cameron's Darkrai Hammers in the final. In Aberdare, it was won by Charles Barton's Rayquaza Eels, beating Mike Lamb's Rayquaza Eels in the final. Now, I have no interviews, unfortunately, but the 3 people who have won tournaments in the UK so far are Johnny Hall, Dan Middleton and Charles Barton. They will all be at Nottingham Battle Roads a week this Saturday, and they have all agreed to give me interviews. So in 2 weeks' time, this podcast will have interviews from all 3 of them, as well as, hopefully, assuming they don't turn me down, an interview with the winner of Nottingham Battle Roads. So there is going to be a very nice interview bonanza coming up in a couple of weeks. And there isn't really much else to go through this week because we are running a little over time already. One thing I learnt this week, don't make last minute changes. At Nationals I took out my 2 Lost Remover last minute for an Evian and Espeon, and that Evian and Espeon did allow me to beat a Vanillux deck, which I only played because I lost to a Kling Clang deck because I took my Lost Remover out. It was silly. I fell foul of this again in Aberdare when I took my Mew EX out. Literally had to go and get my deck list back from the organisers to make the change last minute. And as Mike had added Mewtwo in, it meant that I didn't have that option to try and steal 2 prizes at a crucial point. Don't do it, it's stupid. The other interesting thing about the weekend is once again the English invaded. There was a Battle Roads this time last year in Cardiff. Tommy Roberts drove down taking George Boone, Mal Cameron and myself, and the 4 of us took the top 4 places, all the prize support offered, and then immediately drove back to England. And a similar thing happened in Aberdare this weekend. I went down from England, as did Mike and Charles. Charles took first, Mike took second, I took third, and then we all turned around and left the country again. We did let Calvin get 4th, which I think was very good of us, and he got a couple packs for that, but I can only apologise to the people of Wales for us English people running down and raiding their tournaments. So, I hope I've informed you all about Plasma Gale and the changes that are going to be coming. I would assume around about our February set just after Cities but before States. And I hope I've entertained you a little bit with my stories of Battle Roads. Next week I'll be telling you more about the new season and the decks to watch. Don't forget, as always, find me on Twitter at TheWassy. Please follow me. Send me a tweet. You can see I respond to my tweets. You can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, and if you email me, you will of course get a reply. I wouldn't be so rude as to ignore your email. If you haven't done so already, please go onto iTunes and subscribe. It does me the world of good if you do. Send me any questions you've got. Send me any feedback you've got here. Or, as I haven't asked for a couple of weeks, send me any memorable games you've had. My name's been Ross, it still is in fact, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.
Well, thank you for that, Ross. It was both informative and stimulating.